Continue on now our series, Conversations with Christ. This message was subtitled Jesus Stops a Man from Living in a Tree. This, of course, is the well-known story from Luke 19, verses 1 to 10, where Jesus speaks to Zacchaeus. The wee little man was he. Jesus speaks to him and has an encounter with him. And it's remarkable, when you start to look into depth and look at the background to this story and what's going on. It says in Luke 19, verse 1, it says, Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. Jericho is a remarkable town at this time. It wasn't Jericho that was destroyed by the children of Israel. Over the years, there's been a few towns in the same sort of area that were also called Jericho. This town was an affluent town. It was right at the cross point where people would have crossed from east to west coming into Israel. And as such, it had a lot of trade, a lot of people coming and going. Famously, Mark Antony, who was the boyfriend of Cleopatra, if you remember Cleopatra, he gave Cleopatra estates in Jericho because the area was so nice, the climate was so pleasant, there was vineyards and groves there. It was really the place to be and the place to be seen. Herod the Great actually rented those same estates because he liked to spend his holidays there, or his summer retreat, as it were. That's the sort of an area it was. It's really, if you think of it along the lines of somewhere like, I guess globally you'd be looking at somewhere like Hollywood Boulevard. It's a place to see and be seen, where all of the powerful movers and shakers all would have gone there for holidays and for some sort of break. Of course, you've got that mixing of commerce and trade, so there's a lot of money there. This was an exotic city with all the mixing of cultures, of people from different civilizations, different cultures, all bringing their own flavor to this city. So it's been a very eclectic sort of mix of people, colors, and of clothing, and of traditions. So Jesus comes into the city, and when he does, it mentions here that there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector. Now, to be a tax collector in those days meant that you had bidded for the right to collect taxes. The Romans evaluated a province, and they would have said, in this area, we think that there is this many people, there's this much trade, this is the sort of roughly the tax that we expect. Now then, they would do is open it for tender, and businessmen or less scrupulous men would have then gone to the Roman authorities and says, I'll give you 1,000 denarii a month on taxes, and the whoever was making the decision would evaluate that. Then someone else would come along and say, I'll give you 1,200 denarii, and so on, forth and so on. They would have bidded for it, and then what happens is the person who won the bid would then go back to the population and would start to bring in that tax. Now, they wouldn't necessarily bring in whatever they had bid. Say they had bid 1,000, they would have brought in 1,200 and pocketed the rest. But the Roman authorities didn't care. As long as they got what was agreed, that's all they cared about. These people were very influential. They're very important in some ways, because if you didn't pay the tax that they felt that you owed, they could go to the magistrate, they could go to the Roman authorities, and they could bring up an accusation against you. They could say, this man hasn't paid his taxes, you throw him in jail. And it could do that all the time, as that threat lurked. So tax collectors were not popular people, because not only were they extorting money out of their people, not only were they being criminal in their behavior in that respect, they were also then funding the Roman authorities who were living and controlling their province. The Roman soldiers who were in their area were at their beck and call. These were the men who would point the finger, and the Romans would go and gather that family or that businessman up and take him away to jail, and things like that there. So they were not nice men. They were not well liked. They were obviously served the Roman authorities, and as such, the people of Israel, no matter where in the empire they were, these people were not well liked at all, especially in Israel. who seen the Romans as bringing in paganism and worshipping false gods and things like that there. So Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector, when it says chief tax collector, it's safe to assume that he not only collected taxes, but actually he had got to the point where he had bidded on another area, and he says, I'll collect the taxes there, and I'll collect the taxes here, and maybe somewhere else as well. So he actually had under him tax collectors who he had employed to do the dirty work for him. So he would have been a very, very wealthy man, and very hated, and very much someone that was avoided. You would avoid these people, because if you came along near them, they would then see some signs of wealth. Oh, I mustn't be taxing enough. Maybe I can tax some more. And things like that there. So that was the sort of the situation. So Zacchaeus, he was a chief tax collector. He was a glorified collector for the mob, if you think of it that way. If you didn't pay your taxes, he would call the authorities and they would get involved. He was the lowest of the low, not someone who was liked or received all that well. People avoided him. They took a wide berth of him. They stayed away from him because of his reputation, because of what he could do to them. So he was not well liked. But what else do we know about Zacchaeus? We know that he was a determined man. We know that he faced challenges, as many people did in those days, and he had overcome them. He had been determined to succeed, determined to claw his way out from the bottom all the way to the top. He was determined to get ahead in the game. By hook or by crook, he had clawed his way up. He was a problem solver. He seen an opportunity and he seized it. He seen a problem and he looked for solutions for that problem. You can see that evident in the fact that he couldn't see because of his small stature. He couldn't see Jesus, so his thoughts went to, I know, I'll climb a tree. So he was a bit of a problem solver. He was determined, regardless of what happened and what was around him. He was determined man. Certainly in his business dealings and his tax collecting and in his personal life here. Jesus, at this point in his ministry, he's at really the pinnacle of his ministry. He's at really that height where people are flocking to him. They're coming to see a miracle. They're coming to see what he's going to do. They're waiting for him to make some sort of comments about the chief priests and scribes and Pharisees. They like the idea of him sticking it to the man, or of rebelling against the established order of things. They're hanging on his every word. Here he's at the height of his popularity, and he comes along to Jericho, and he's at the height of his popularity, and Zacchaeus is at the bottom of his popularity. He is not popular whatsoever. The heights and the lows. It would remind you of the story of Jim Baker, who famously was arrested and convicted of fraud, and was in prison, who was a Christian televangelist. And here he was, he'd gone from the heights of having a TV ministry and being so popular, and he's been sent to jail. And here he's in with the common thieves and the common murderers, and here he is at the lowest of the low. And I remember hearing the story when he was in jail, where he had a visitor came to him. And one day, Billy Graham came to the prison to visit him. And you can imagine Billy Graham, the statesman, Billy Graham, the evangelist, the pastor of presidents, is standing in the jail to visit this man who is disgraced, this man who has been shunned by much of the church world, this man who is living amongst the sinners because he's no other choice. And I heard the story being recounted by Jim Baker, how when Billy Graham came into the room and he threw out his arms and he embraced him. You know, that is just the grace of God, isn't it? Just to reach out to those who are rejected, those who are maligned, those who have dug a hole for themselves. And yet God still reaches out to them in grace and in mercy. And really this encounter between Jesus and Zacchaeus, it's exactly what it is. It's God reaching out in grace and mercy to a man who is hated, despised, rejected. This is a week before Jesus was going to go to the cross. How much more significant could it be? Where Jesus would be going to the cross and he would become the one who was hated, who was despised, who was rejected. What a significant conversation to look at. A significant thing for us to take note of, the circumstances surrounding it. It says in verse 3 of Luke 19, it says, and he sought to see who Jesus was. The term there, sought to see Jesus, it's in Greek and it's written in the perfect tense. In other words, what it means is that he had sought to see Jesus over and over and over again. He had been trying all that he could do to see Jesus, and he had failed time and time and time again. But this time, because he's a problem solver, because he's determined, he tried something differently. And he climbed a tree. He climbed a tree. Not something that many men do in those days. Certainly not unless it was for employment. Certainly not something that we do today. Many men, your dignity and your pride wouldn't permit you to do that. But Zacchaeus, in his determination, in his eagerness to see Jesus, to find out who he was and what his message was, to have an encounter with Jesus, in his determination, he cast aside all his pride and all his position and his dignity, and he climbed a tree. And it says that Jesus came along, and it says, and he looked, and he saw, and he said. He looked up into the tree and he seen Zacchaeus. And he saw him. He saw what he was doing. He took into account all that he had seen, all that he was looking at. A grown man up a tree who has cast aside things. In that one glance, Christ got to the heart of Zacchaeus. In that one moment, he understood where Zacchaeus was, that he sought to see Jesus, that he was determined to see Jesus, that he was putting effort in. I want to get to know him. I want to see him. And he looked, he saw, and he said, and he spoke to Zacchaeus. We have accounts of Jesus being in people's houses, going to their house and spending time there. We think of Lazarus' house, how he spent time there. He loved to just have fellowship with them, with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. You think of the time where he was teaching in the house and the men came and took the roof off to lower their friend in. Other times where he was in houses. But this is the first time and only time where Jesus asked someone if he could go to their house. And Jesus does that this time. He asked, he said, make haste and come down. Make haste and come down. Come down quickly, Zacchaeus. Actually, I love that. He says, make haste and come down. Jesus saw him, verse 5. Jesus looked up and saw him and said, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So he, that is Zacchaeus, made haste and came down and received him joyfully. This is a scene where Jesus there's an eagerness in him. Make haste, quick, come down. Get down here, wee man. He didn't say wee man, but he said, come down. Quick, get down here. I've got to go to your house. I've got to spend the day with you. And Zacchaeus clambers down the tree, and he comes to Jesus, and he really received him joyfully. Now, this isn't the joy of pride or arrogance. He isn't saying, look, I've got the best man or the most popular man in town coming to my house. That's not what's going on here at all. Remember, he's cast aside his pride and his dignity in order to climb this tree, in order to see Jesus. So he's now quickly clambered down the tree and he's received Jesus joyfully. Joyfully. It would remind you, wouldn't it, of the story of the prodigal son, where he'd gone off into the far land and he'd spent all he had on all the worldly pleasures. And it says that as he came to himself and as he came back, it says that the father seen him and ran to him. And the father received him joyfully. He embraced him. He kissed him. It's the same type of emotion that's being expressed here. There's an excitement, there's a joy. Finally, Zacchaeus has met Jesus. Finally, I'm going to have a conversation with him. He totally forgot about those around him, forgot about what people would say about him. Actually, as you go on in the passage, it says there in verse 7, it says, but when they saw it, in other words, those people who were watching on, or maybe those people who were just critical, those people who had a contrite spirit and a critical spirit, whenever they saw it, they all complained. See, they had pride, they had arrogance, they had presuppositions, they had an idea of how Christ should act and where Christ should go and who he should mix with. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, he has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. Jesus, as gracious as ever, didn't even respond to them. It's noted in here for our admonition, for our warning, not to be critical of these things, not to be judgmental. But they were critical and judgmental. Zacchaeus didn't even hear it, because Zacchaeus' heart was to see Jesus and spend time with Jesus. He maybe had heard those things before, so now they just washed over him. Jesus didn't even rise to it, didn't even respond to it. It was an important moment that was coming. There was something significant that had to be done here. He had to have a conversation with Zacchaeus. In this moment, Jesus has stopped Zacchaeus from spending the rest of his life living in a tree, separated and distant from God. He stopped him from remaining on the outside of the things of God, seeking but never realizing. How often had he sought to see Christ? Had he maybe been in Jerusalem and tried to see him and he had failed? Had he maybe been in the neighbouring towns and tried to see him and failed? Searching but never finding. Being on the edges of society without true friendship or companionship. Zacchaeus might not have physically been living in a tree. He might not have even considered it. But certainly it was an embodiment of what he was going through, where he was socially and emotionally and in society. And as far as the religious things and things of God, he was far from them. So Jesus went and spent some time with him. It says in verse 8, then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusations, I restore fourfold. See what Christ had done by interrupting him staying up a tree, by stopping him and bringing him down out of the tree, by ignoring the comments by the naysayers and those who were critical in their spirits and judgmental. He had spoke volumes to Zacchaeus. He had told Zacchaeus that he was of worth and he was of value. Now this idea here, he had gone and he had spent time in Zacchaeus' house, spent time with him. Who knows what they had discussed? Probably discussed the kingdom of heaven. Probably discussed the heart of God, the heart of the Father for those who are lost. And Zacchaeus' response is, I will give half of what I have to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone, or if I've taken anything from anyone by false accusation, in other words, if I've gone to the Roman authorities and pointed someone out as a criminal or as not paying their taxes, if I've done that, which he probably had, I'll repay them fourfold for all that I've done. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house. Today salvation has come to this house. He recognized what he had done wrong, and he repented of it, turned away from it, made restitution for it. And Jesus said, today salvation is come to this house. Wow. Wow. Really? Remarkable, isn't it? What a story. And the most significant verse in this passage is verse 10, which really the whole story hangs on. Verse 10 says, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Zacchaeus was lost. Zacchaeus was seeking. And here Jesus came and he sought him out and he found him and he saved him. This story, this encounter with Zacchaeus, this conversation, follows not long after the story of the rich young ruler who had so much promise, and who had lived his life well by religious terms, and yet he had turned away from Christ. And here was Zacchaeus, a man who was destitute of holiness, destitute of as far as the things of God was concerned. He was just bereft of any value spiritually or in religious terms at all. And yet, whenever Christ met him, his soul felt its worth, and he turned to see Christ. He turned away from all those things that had enchanted him and charmed him most, and he turned to face Jesus, and he looked in Jesus' face and he repented, and today salvation was coming to his house. What an encounter with Christ. What a conversation with Christ. Something of note, something for us to take note of. The significance of it, the importance of it. I pray that this message has blessed you. I pray that it's encouraged you. You know what? It really has encouraged me. It's good to know that he came to seek and to save that which was lost. And here was a man who was so lost, and he saved him. Today, salvation came to his house. Pray if you don't know Christ today that you'll come to know him. Because to know him is to know true wealth, true blessing, true prosperity, true peace, true happiness, true joy, true fulfillment. To know him is everything. He is our portion. Next time, whenever we meet, we'll be talking about how Jesus met two men on the road to nowhere. Two men on the road to nowhere. I pray this blessed you. All right. God bless. Take care.